Following the murder of King Von, the affidavit further disclosed that confidential witness one knew that Lil Durk placed other.
You know what I'm saying? Because it had to be that. Ain't no way. Motherfucker followed them on somebody. Motherfucker, they put an air tag. If a nigga got an air tag, well, they gonna catch you at the light. They ain't gonna wait till you motherfucker pull up to no motherfucking store. And man, they wanted him, man. Somebody wanted him bad, man. That was.
Did the man who once said the streets were a revolving door just become the architect of that very cycle? Right after the headlines exploded, whispers began to turn into a quiet, relentless storm, an unearthed narrative that wasn't just about headlines, but about a soul on the brink. Friends and collaborators have spoken of Lil Durk's own mental health fraying under the weight of fame, constant threats, and the relentless grind of a city that refuses to stay still. He said the violence keeps him trapped, a carousel spinning in circles where each turn ushers in a new danger. Now, the city's heartbeat has hit a new rhythm. A court has finally handed down a sentence linking the rapper to orchestrating the deaths of King Von and the tragic incident involving THF Bezu. The fallout is as brutal as the music that once lifted him. A chorus of grief, a collective lament that echoes through midnight streets, and a legacy that feels like a wound on a body already fragile. Stay with us as we unpack how this sentencing reshapes a narrative that began with a promise to bring people together and ends with a courtroom that says goodbye forever. The night the streets dimmed, a pulse that had once vibrated through every block of Chicago's South Side turned into a low thud, a reminder that somewhere, a voice that had been shouting stories of survival, hope, and the weight of legacy had been silenced. The headlines screamed about a sudden, brutal exit. The city's heart slowed as the names of those lost, THF Bezu and King Von, echoed in the quiet. Yet, behind the headline's bluntness lay a more complex story, one that intertwined loyalty, betrayal, and the relentless churn of violence that had become the backdrop for the Chicago rap scene. As the city tried to process the tragedy, the rumor that Lil Durk, a prominent figure whose lyrics often mirrored the street's realities, might have orchestrated the event added a chilling layer of intrigue. This rumor was not merely a speculative whisper, it cut through the fabric of the community, shaking trust and prompting a deeper look at the mental and emotional toll that the constant threat of violence exacts on those within the inner circle. Conversations with friends and collaborators who had shared a studio, a table, a corner booth revealed a quieter but equally potent narrative: Lil Durk's mental state. The weight of a burgeoning career, the pressure to stay relevant in a landscape saturated with rivals, and the ever-present threat of gunfire all coalesced into a mental health crisis that many had never spoken of publicly. One close associate, speaking in hushed tones, described how Durk often spoke about the revolving door of violence, an endless cycle that felt impossible to escape. The streets, the associate said, are a place where no one is spared. You keep hearing that the revolving door never closes. These words, echoing through the dim corners of recording studios and late-night conversations, painted a picture of a man trapped in a carousel that spun faster with each new threat, each new hit that landed on the streets. Durk's own admissions about the psychological burden of living in an environment where a gunshot could happen at any moment added a layer of authenticity to the rumor, raising questions about how far the cycle could be allowed to spiral before breaking. The city's reaction was a chorus of grief, amplified by the way it permeated every midnight playlist, every radio show that tried to keep the memory alive. For many, the loss of THF Bezu felt like a wound inflicted upon an already fragile body. The streets, known for their vibrancy and color, seemed to lose a voice that had tried to bridge divides and unite people through music. The loss was felt in corners where friends had gathered to celebrate, in studios where the next hit was being recorded, and in living rooms where family members sat with their phones, scrolling through messages that seemed to grow louder and louder. The simple message that THF Bezu was gone became a mantra, a line that everyone whispered, each time a reminder of how the city had become a little less bright. Yet within this simplicity lay the complex interplay of life, loyalty, conflict, and the eventual tragedy that could not be ignored. Within that storm of speculation, the rumor that Lil Durk might have been involved in orchestrating the shooting added a layer of complexity that tested the public's perception of an artist known for honesty. The rumor was not backed by concrete evidence, but it spread like wildfire, fueled by the public's need to find meaning in a sudden loss. While many who knew Durk spoke of his loyalty, his respect for his peers, and his storytelling that often highlighted the pain of Chicago's streets, the possibility that he could be implicated in a violent act seemed to shake the community's sense of safety. The speculation sparked a debate about whether the violent narratives in music were merely artistic expressions, or if they could sometimes bleed into real life.
No more. It's just normal to the people who live in it. I'm not here to judge nobody.
It also prompted a conversation about how the media, eager for sensational stories, can sometimes amplify rumors that may not have a factual basis, thereby diverting the focus from deeper systemic issues to sensationalist gossip. Police involvement in the investigation brought a measured tone to a scene that had already been flooded with speculation. Officers approached the case with caution, aware that misinformation could exacerbate tensions. The absence of clear evidence made the investigation slow, with the police highlighting the possibility that the shooting might have been the result of a personal vendetta rather than a broader conspiracy. The investigative process took time, a period that tested the patience of a community that was still trying to find a sense of closure. The slow march toward clarity was a reminder that in a city where rumors can travel faster than a viral clip, the truth often takes a much longer path to emerge. The community, meanwhile, remained united in grief, yet also in resolve. They continued to celebrate the legacy of the artists who had once spoken about their hardships, hoping that their stories could offer some guidance in navigating a landscape that seemed to tilt toward tragedy with each passing day. The ripple of loss also touched those who had been close to the artist, to the man who had used music as a platform to share his pain, his joy, and his struggles. Friends, collaborators, and fans who had once sat in studios together now found themselves in a space where silence weighed heavy, yet a shared narrative offered a form of solace. The conversation that unfolded among those who had once shared laughter, recorded songs, and celebrated life was now a quiet, reflective moment. In that moment, the city's pulse seemed to slow, as if it were trying to catch up to the new reality that had been thrust upon it. The story of that day, a story that had begun with a rumor and evolved into a painful truth, remains a stark reminder that a city's resilience can only be as strong as its ability to confront the mental and emotional toll that violence imposes. It was a reminder that while artists may use their voices to bring people together, the underlying forces that drive a city toward violence are complex and multifaceted, requiring a collective effort that goes beyond the surface of speculation and headlines. The rumor that had swirled like a dark cloud over the city began to feel less like a whispered myth and more like a ticking clock, each passing day amplifying the tension in the streets. When the police finally released the first set of evidence, it was enough to ignite a flurry of speculation, yet far from conclusive. The files contained a series of phone records and surveillance footage that pointed to a chain of events, but the central question, who had pulled the trigger, who had planned the shot, remained unanswered. It was this ambiguity that pushed the community to turn to voices they trusted more than headlines. T600 and Ramo, two well-known local influencers, found themselves at the heart of a conversation that would ripple across neighborhoods. In a dimly lit corner of a community center, T600 and Ramo spoke of THF Boyzoo with a reverence that echoed the collective mourning. THF Boyzoo's presence had once been a beacon of hope for young artists, a figure whose music bridged divisions, whose lyrical honesty resonated with anyone who had felt the weight of systemic neglect. When T600 mentioned the mural project, Ramo's eyes lit up, recalling how Boyzoo's verses had once spoken against the very poverty and distrust that now seemed to dominate the city. He was more than a rapper, Ramo said. He was a mirror to our streets. Their dialogue unfolded in a way that felt like a healing ritual. The conversation was not about assigning blame, but about preserving the memory of a life cut too soon. the open space where they talked became a quiet sanctuary, a physical reminder that amidst the noise of accusation, the city still carried a place for reflection. Yet as the debate unfolded, the rumor about a big name, most notably Lil Durk, steered the conversation toward a different trajectory. The media had a habit of turning shadows into headlines, and the speculation that Durk had orchestrated the tragedy only intensified the public's thirst for answers. Each new article seemed to reinforce the narrative that a prominent figure in the music industry had a hand in a brutal act that claimed 2 lives. In the meantime, the city's mental health crisis sat uncomfortably under the surface, a silent, growing storm that had been simmering in the aftermath of the killings. The fact-checking forum that was later created became a beacon of truth, a place where community leaders and fact-checkers could sift through sources, separating the grain of verified information from the wheat of unsubstantiated claims.
Involved in this murder for hire. One of the things that caught my eye in their response opposing Lil Durk's motion to dismiss.
In this digital arena, residents were encouraged to pause before sharing a headline, to consider the origin of the information, and to verify the chain of evidence. This new platform did more than correct misconceptions. It helped shift the conversation from a sensational narrative to a constructive dialogue about prevention and resilience. The city's response to the mounting uncertainty was swift yet measured. A series of town halls were convened in the weeks that followed, bringing together a cross-section of stakeholders: school administrators, parents, law enforcement officials, and local artists into a single room, where the weight of grief and frustration could be voiced. In the council chambers, city officials listened as a mother, her son's life having been claimed by the violence, stepped onto the stage, her voice trembling but unyielding. She urged that the city honor her son by investing in safe spaces, by providing opportunities for youth to find a path away from the streets. Her testimony echoed the larger call for structural change, one that had been brewing in the shadows of the rumor for weeks. The city's decision to pass an ordinance that funded youth mentorship programs was a tangible response to her plea. It was a policy that did not merely offer temporary respite. It aimed to embed mentorship into the fabric of the neighborhoods, providing guidance and tangible prospects for young people who might otherwise feel trapped by the same forces that had drawn them to the streets. The artistic community, too, found its own avenue for healing. A memorial concert organized by local musicians turned the city's parks and abandoned warehouses into a stage for collective grief and celebration. Spoken word poets and rappers took turns delivering pieces that spoke directly to the loss of a youth, but also to the broader implications of unchecked violence. In the foreground of the event, a collaborative mural project unfolded. Different neighborhoods contributed to the creation of symbols of unity and resilience across the city's walls. This act of public art was more than a tribute. It was a declaration that the spaces once haunted by tragedy could be transformed into canvases of hope. Each brushstroke told a story of solidarity, of neighbors joining hands to paint a future that would not be marred by the same gunfire that had once silenced their streets. Meanwhile, the trial process began to take shape. The police had gathered enough material to move forward. Forensic evidence, intercepted communications, and a chain of events that, when laid out on a courtroom table, painted a chilling picture. Yet the defense presented counter-arguments that highlighted the lack of direct evidence linking Durk to the orchestrating of the killings. In a courtroom that had become a theater for the city's collective anxiety, witnesses, including those who had known THF Boy Zoo and King Von, shared stories that underscored the complex interplay of loyalty, fear, and survival in the streets. The prosecution's arguments hinged on a pattern of behavior that suggested Durk's involvement in orchestrating conflicts that had escalated to lethal outcomes. The defense, however, portrayed him as a figure caught in a web of misinformation, a man whose public persona had never intended harm. The night of the sentencing, the courthouse was a hive of voices, each eager for closure. As the judge announced the verdict, Lil Durk would be sentenced for his role in orchestrating the violence that took King Von and THF Bezou's lives. The courtroom held its breath. The sentence was not merely a punishment. It was a stark reminder of the city's capacity to seek justice, but also of the fragility of its social fabric. The verdict was met with a mixture of relief and lingering fear. For some, it felt like the first step toward healing, a closure that the city had long demanded. For others, it deepened the sense that the roots of violence were deeper than a single person's actions. The community understood that the sentencing of Durk, while significant, was just one chapter in a larger story of systemic failure and the need for holistic reform. In the aftermath of the sentencing, the city's momentum for change continued to gather pace. The task force that had been formed, comprising mental health professionals, educators, city officials, and artists, presented a multi-year plan to tackle the root causes of the violence that had permeated the city. Their proposal outlined measurable metrics, a targeted reduction in recidivism rates, an increase in counseling center visits, and improved engagement in school programs. They called for the expansion of community policing units that would attend local events, participate in neighborhood patrols, and actively listen to the concerns of residents. These initiatives were not merely administrative. They were designed to foster trust, to rebuild the bond between the city's law enforcement and its citizens.
If you listen to Lil Durk's music, if you listen to Lil Durk's admissions, man, listen.
As the new counseling centers opened in underserved neighborhoods, residents could finally access mental health resources that had once seemed a distant dream. The city's public health department launched a campaign that went beyond the standard pamphlets. It featured testimonials from people's lives had been altered by the new services. Students who, after receiving counseling, chose to stay in school. Parents who found peace knowing that their children had a safe place to turn. Artists who, with the support of community mentors, refined their craft in ways that kept them away from the cycle of violence. This outreach was a visible proof that the city's investments were paying off. That the healing was not just in the memory of a tragedy, but in the tangible improvement of everyday life. At the same time, the conversation around rumor management continued to grow. The forum that had been established to fact-check claims became a hub for critical thinking, offering a place where citizens could cross-reference sources, debate evidence, and learn how to discern the difference between fear-mongering headlines and verified reports. This platform became a key component of the city's broader strategy to ensure that future crises would not be mired in misinformation. By turning the public into informed participants, the city aimed to create a more resilient community, one that could rise above the divisive noise and focus on prevention. The sentencing of Lil Durk, an event that had once seemed like a distant rumor, was a turning point that forced the city to confront its own complicity in a system that allowed violence to flourish. The judge's words, "You orchestrated a crime that took 2 innocent lives," were a stark reminder that accountability could not be delayed. Yet the sentencing also opened a new chapter, a space for introspection. The city recognized that a single conviction, however significant, would not erase the systemic issues that underpinned the tragedy. The task force's continued work, analyzing data, adjusting programs, and ensuring that the metrics showed progress, was a promise that the city would not let the memory of THF Boyzoo and King Von fade into a forgotten footnote. In the months that followed, the city's efforts began to bear fruit. New counseling centers sprouted in neighborhoods that had long been underserved, offering a haven where youth could discuss their anxieties without fear of judgment. Police precincts adopted a community-first approach. Officers regularly attended local events, participated in neighborhood patrols, and listened to residents' concerns. The council passed an ordinance that earmarked funds for youth mentorship, linking schools with local businesses and artists to provide real-world experience. These changes were not quick fixes. They were long-term commitments, a shift toward building an environment where both artists and fans could pursue their passions without fear. Reflecting on the city's journey, one realizes that the story is far from over. The sentencing of Lil Durk closed a chapter in the narrative of violence, but it also highlighted the broader context in which such tragedies arise. The conversation about poverty, inadequate educational resources, and the erosion of trust between residents and police had shifted from abstract policy proposals to concrete actions. The city's multi-year plan now measures progress not only in reduced crime rates, but in the quality of life of its citizens. As the city continues to evolve, the memory of THF Boizu and King Von serves as a constant reminder that every life cut short carries a responsibility to spark change. The memorial concert and the mural project stood as symbols of the city's resilience, turning grief into a catalyst for community action. The open space where T600 and Ramo once spoke now buzzes with new conversations, each echoing the commitment that the city has made to listen, to act, and to transform the streets that once echoed with gunfire into places of hope and solidarity. This is a city that refuses to let the past dictate its future. It is a city that has turned a rumor into a lesson, a sentence into a pledge, and a tragedy into a movement toward lasting change. The verdict against Lil Durk finally cuts the loop of speculation, yet it only opens a wider conversation about the roots of violence that Chicago streets have endured for decades. In its wake, the city has begun to weave mental health centers, youth mentorship programs, and community policing units into the neighborhoods that once echoed with gunfire, turning grief into a concrete agenda for reform. As we close this chapter of justice, we must ask, can a single sentence truly transform the systemic failings that enabled King Von and THF Boizu's lives to be taken? Or will Chicago's future depend on the collective actions we choose next?